being recorded.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for joining us today for our Trending Topics webinar. My name is Cheryl Doucette, the Director of Program Services for Kids Chance of America. I'm delighted to serve as your moderator today as we learn more about volunteer boards and understand how we can create the best experience for our board members. So our presenter today is Debbie Mason. She's the Kids Chance of America Chief Operating Officer. We also have two very special guests joining us today, Bob Wilson, Kids Chance of America Board Secretary, and John Goldwater, Kids Chance of America Board Development Chair. Both of these gentlemen know a bit about Kids Chance board service from a state level as well as a national level. So let's see here. I would like to, some of the attendees that we have on today, I recognize from the conference, some of you attended conference. So this is a continuation of the conversation that Debbie started at the conference around board development, board engagement, and just board structure in general. So this webinar will allow us to take a deeper dive into conversations related to effective board development and structure. So in a nutshell, you're going to learn about the 3 legal duties of every board member. Some of you may be familiar with that, some may not. You will review and share, or we will review and share a checklist for governance and oversight. We will review and share a checklist for board performance and metrics. So you will have to use your Q&A. Julie and I will be monitoring that Q&A. So any questions throughout this is designed to be very interactive. I know it's hard when it's in a webinar setting because you do feel a little once, twice removed. But Bob's here, John's here, I'm here. We're just having a conversation. You guys can chime in with questions anytime you have them. So I did want to share a little bit about our speaker today. Debbie Mason has been a consultant to business and nonprofit government clients for more than 20 years. Her career also includes marketing, agency ownership, and healthcare and international corporate C-suite roles before transitioning to nonprofit leadership. In the nonprofit sector, she has served as CEO to 3 foundations before serving this year in fractional CEO, COO roles. Debbie holds numerous professional credentials in public relations and fundraising, including certified fundraising executive, certified public relations counselor from the Florida Public Relations Association, accredited public relations professional from the Universal Accreditation Board, and has been recognized as a fellow by the Public Relations Society of America, PRSA. So it is a pleasure to welcome our presenter for today's session, Debbie Mason. Take it away.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Bob and John, for joining us, and Julie for helping us navigate today. We're very excited to spend time with you all about this topic, and we've got a short deck that we're going to bring up. I'm going to focus on the content, and then we're going to take it down and have some conversations. So today is about creating the best experience we can for our volunteer boards. And next slide, please. We want to look at the 3 areas we're going to cover today. As Cheryl mentioned, the legal duties, governance oversight, and board performance. Next, please. So why is this a priority? Next slide. Because you matter to us. And when your board is stronger and you have better state board performance, we will be able to give more scholarships for kids. And that means we'll be recruiting, training, and measuring board success, which in itself creates a culture of performance. And my experience, having been a volunteer board member myself, is we as volunteers have choices of the boards we want to serve on. And some missions really move us. And it's a wonderful experience when we can join a board where the mission really moves us and the board itself has terrific board performance, where there's self-accountability and group accountability, and that's what creates a positive experience. And at the end of the day, we want to be the board of choice, not only for people who work in the workers' compensation industry, but also for people who are community leaders, financial contributors, donors, and other people who care about the future of kids like us. So it really does start at the top. And I ask this question here: what is the most important board of your committee? So next slide, for those of you that were with us in Chicago, no surprise here, the governance committee, and you may call that by some other name, but whatever committee has governance responsibilities for your board. Next, please. And what we want to start with today is the 3 legal duties of all boards. So all boards have a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, and a duty of obligation, which you'll also hear as duty of obedience. And I'm going to spend just a minute explaining those, and then we're going to go into the practicalities of those. Basically, the duty of care is we as board members must take care and prudent use of all of our assets. And assets include people, our board members, our volunteers, our employees, if we have those, and obviously the goodwill and reputation of our organization. The duty of loyalty says we are always, as individual and collective boards, required to make decisions that put first the best interest of the nonprofit, always, and not the best interest of the board members. The duty of obligation or obedience says we have an obligation to adhere to our bylaws, the laws in the state in which we're registered, the regulations of those states, and also to stick to our stated purpose and mission to make sure that we don't have mission drift, right? We have a very specific mission, and that's what we should stick to. And that's what the duty of obedience is all about. So let's take that into granularity. That's fine, Julie, we're good. The duty of care is really all about the recruitment process for our board members and our volunteers. And the governance committee, in its oversight role, is looking at you as an individual contributor and you collectively as the whole board, and looking at that performance. Are you meeting the standards of the job description that we describe as a board member job description, as a collective board? And then, are we adhering to our bylaws, the policies of our organization? If we have a gift acceptance policy that says we don't accept real estate or vehicles, are we adhering to that policy at our state or even our national organization? And the governance committee maintains that oversight. Next, please, Julie. The duty of loyalty, go one back, please. The duty of loyalty, where we talked about that decision making earlier. This came about, for those of you who remember the Enron scandal. After the Enron scandal came Sarbanes-Oxley for corporations, and then we had a similar thing that came through Congress for nonprofit organizations. And the duty of loyalty basically says we make fact-based decisions, not opinion-based. So it may be my opinion that we should buy that building for our Kids Chance organization, but what data are we looking at to make that decision, to make the best decisions? And it's all about avoiding conflict of interest. So yes, we need to have a conflict of interest policy, but we need to ensure that every day our decisions make not even the hint of a conflict of interest ever apparent to anyone. And we need to make sure we have the IRS required policies for conflict of interest, whistleblower, and the others. And we do have those listed. And the final duty is this duty of obligation and mission. So this duty of obedience, where we stay true to our mission. At Kids Chance, we raise dollars for scholarships. That's it. That's our mission, right? We don't raise dollars for XYZ over here or for ABC. we raise dollars for scholarships, and we want to make sure that we stay focused on our mission and we don't have mission drift. We want to make sure that we adhere to our bylaws and we do our work the way that we say we are going to. And it's really important to make sure that if we're fundraising in our state requires registration, that we're paying attention to all of the laws and registrations that are required to operate. So we're going to take the deck down and have a little conversation now about all of those things we covered in the 3 duties. And we've got our champion board members here, and we're going to ask them to share some best practices that they have seen and done themselves in applying those 3 duties. Gentlemen?
Well, I think I'll start off only because John nominated me to start off. He's got in ahead of me. I think from a point of view, and I can speak from my experience in Kids Chance of Florida, when I was president of that group, we did not actually have a governance committee, but still, when you look at the points you carried, the duty of loyalty and follow through, it really struck me that the key was finding the right people who are really dedicated to the mission and would follow that mission. And I think that's what really kept us in line with what we were supposed to do. That was one of the better things, is finding people who were interested in serving on the board, qualified, willing, and not interested in a notch on their resume. I think that's one of the biggest things you have to caution against. Granted, I'm not on the board anymore. One of the things we'll talk about when we get to recycling, why the Florida board is actually so strong. But I think that the idea of formalizing some of those structures and what we went over in Chicago with the governance committee would be a very good idea for all the state boards to look at, just to make sure all of those 3 areas are really being followed and adhered to.
Bob, what I would add to that is I was started with Kids Chance of Virginia and was on the initial president when we started. And we also didn't have a governance committee at that time. And where I saw this, where the sort of need comes out is we did the same thing. We selected board members because of their attributes, their passion, and sort of were they complementary to one another towards our mission. As time went on, this thing around our bylaws, we would get into board sessions and no one could really cite bylaws. We were having to go back and dig through to find out if we were adhering. So this whole practice of making governance a key point in your committee at a state level, I think is a really important one, and one that is, it's not intentionally overlooked, but it's often overlooked in terms of forming that early. So I agree with you. It's really critical, I think, to have that.
It is, and to that point, if I could add, just to follow up, in Florida, and probably most of us were the same way you described in terms of knowing the bylaws. However, we had Judge David Langham on our board, and that man knows every bylaw that we've got. He is a walking encyclopedia, and really did help. It was very helpful, though, at the meetings to have someone who could immediately say, according to this, or understanding this point of the bylaw, because our bylaws are actually structured that we can make certain exceptions, like if you're talking about a scholarship exception. But the board has to debate and vote on that, and it has to be justified. But yeah, knowing that bylaw structure was really critical. The other thing formalized that we do, and this may be a requirement of other state boards, is a statement of non-conflict. That every year we had to sign a fresh statement that we had no personal conflicts that would interfere with our fiscal, our fiduciary responsibilities for the board.
I think the other. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we are going to talk about those policies in the next section. So I would love for you guys to elaborate on that. And we do actually have a question that came up about enforcement. So if you have someone on your board who is in using their personal business and gain in a way that is unethical, or doing things that are a deliberate conflict of interest, despite the bylaws, despite the policy, how do you enforce that? This person said, how do you actually go about releasing someone for these kinds of things? I wonder if you guys would talk a little bit about that.
I'll start, and then Bob, please chime in. My experience with this is that you set expectations with board members sort of on day one, and it's a practice that, again, is an overlooked sort of practice, especially with volunteer boards. But I think it's really important that people come to the board with an understanding of the current board in terms of what are the expectations and what are the commitments that they're making relative to that. And to Bob's point, we also do the conflict of interest statement. But one of the things we talked about, I remember this very early on with every board member, was the fact that in our day jobs, we were often in competition with one another, or in some cases, even in relationships that were not all that comfortable with one another. But when we would come to Kids Chance, we would always talk about the fact that we put all of that aside and all of our focus turns towards more scholarships, more kids, and the monies, and we put all the rest aside. Now, in terms of how you deal with these things, I think if you've had this straightforward conversation, you also have to have ongoing conversations with board members. And when you get to situations that are awkward or start to look like there's a potential conflict, I think it's up to the board president or the governance committee to meet with that member and talk about that situation before it becomes a real problem for the organization. And I think if you do that and you get to and I have not seen a situation where we've had to remove a board member for what I call conduct or unethical sorts of behavior. But I think if you were to get to that, you would have enough conversations that dismissing the person, allowing them to make a comfortable exit off the board, things along those lines, I think is where I would probably take it.
Well, I would agree with what John said, although there are several points in that question asked by an anonymous attendee that are disturbing in the sense that the board president is not on the board, as I understand, so I'm not sure I understand the structure of this particular organization. I would say that removing a board member, you're probably going to have to go to your bylaws again to understand the process that is in place. And hopefully your organization actually has that process in place. It's a little disturbing, some of the things that are being described there, in the sense that, as a board, you're only as good as your very worst member. And if there are some unethical activities going on, it's a cancer and will affect the operation of that board. So, it may be a situation, as John mentioned, you can have a friendly conversation, you can have a talk, you encourage it. But if there are some actual unethical activities going, I would really look to the bylaws of your organization and discuss it further. You may even want to contact Kids Chance of America privately for some advice as to how to proceed if there's an issue. John, I do believe we had an issue years ago with one state where there were funds mishandled and it caused a lot of problems, and because controls were not in place. So I think you don't want to get in that situation that may be alluded to in that particular question.
But I think, Bob, you make a great point in terms of for state organizations, if you find yourself in that situation and you seemingly can't work that out, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call Debbie, or to even call myself. I handle a lot of board development type stuff and have handled that for years. We would be glad to work with you and try to alleviate those types of situations, guide you.
That's you guys bring up a great suggestion, which isn't in this deck, and we are going to move to the next section. But periodically, you want to take a look at your bylaws, and you want to make sure that there is clarity around ethical concerns and removal of board members. How do we remove board members? Should we, as they say, God forbid we ever have to do it, at least we know the rules of how to do it right.
Right.
Julie, let's move ahead to the next section. If we could, please, we'll bring up the deck again. Thank you. So we put together just a very, very simple governance oversight checklist. And we can certainly send you the full complicated version, but basically you want to make sure, particularly because we are volunteer organizations with a lot of turnover, how are you saving your corporate documents? Do you have a Dropbox that every board member has access to? What kind of electronic file storage are you doing? Because you're required to save all of your board minutes. You're required to save donor material. You're required to save financial records. How are you doing that now? And how are those being transferred when you have a new election and new officers? How is that information, your corporate documents, being retained? That's a really important oversight thing that you need to take a look at. You need to have minutes of every meeting. They can be really simple. They can be one page, but you need to have minutes. You need to have documentation of decision making. You need to have a written board job description. Again, these can be really simple tools, and we can give you examples of them. Annually, you need to do a board evaluation. You do it for yourself, you do it for the whole board. But if you have a job description that says, this is what we expect of you, then it's really easy to say, hey, Debbie, you're on this board. How well have you met all of these requirements? Evaluate your own performance. And, I've done that once in my life, and I was really busy, and I looked up and said, I'm not being a good board member. I need to resign until my life is in a place where I can meet all these requirements and come back and be on the board again. And that's what good governance does. It lets people graciously see that themselves, and it makes an easy conversation for holding everybody accountable. Some of our states are big enough that they do have staff. You are required as a board to approve an ED or CEO compensation and benefits annually. Typically, you do that at the time of creating your budget, and that is something that must happen annually. Your board must approve if you are large enough to file a 990, that is revenue of $1 million or greater. Your board must review it before it is filed with the IRS. If you raise $250,000 or more, 250 to 999, you're required to file a Form EZ with the IRS annually. The board is required to review that form before it is submitted. And then you should disclose these publicly. You should put them on your website. There should be a section of your website where people can go and they can see your IRS distinction letter where you were granted a nonprofit status, and you should have your 990s there for the last 2 or 3 years. If someone asks you for those documents, you are required to produce them. But it's a much better practice to just make them publicly available. They are publicly available, by the way. People can go to the IRS and search them. People can go to GuideStar or Charity Navigator and get them. So why not make them available on your own website, right? Okay, next slide, please. The rest of this checklist, these are the 5 policies that every nonprofit that files a 990 is required to have to answer on the 990. Do you have a conflict of interest policy, a whistleblower protecting policy, a document retention and destruction policy, a gift acceptance policy, and then if it's applicable, a joint venture? This is not applicable right now to any of our Kids Chance organizations, but some nonprofits do have joint venture profit making ventures. So again, these are sample policies that we can send to you. So let's take this down and talk a little bit about seeing these governance best practices in action. So John and Bob, any thoughts on those?
What do you think, John?
So one thought that I had and that I've seen work pretty effectively in terms of board governance and in terms of this accountability aspect is where board members come together and make a formal pledge each year to the board itself. And what they're pledging is really defined in terms of time, talent, and treasures, if you will. And with that, this whole issue of doing an annual review then becomes very, very easy to do. It's almost a self-review of yourself relative to the pledge that you made the prior year and throughout the year. It also allows the board to work with their members throughout the year. And I don't know for the folks out there, but I know for our Virginia board, you know, we have varying and have had people that are totally engaged, and we've had people at the other end of the spectrum. And if you have at least an annual pledge in terms of what they might do or what they're willing to do, it's much easier than for someone to go have a conversation with a board member that, let's say, has been fairly inactive for a 6-month period of time relative to what they committed to do. And I think that practice could be a good one for a lot of states, especially with volunteer boards where people are well-meaning, but oftentimes they get caught up in their jobs and a lot of things around life that sort of takes over for them. Bob?
Yeah, I think actually that's a really good suggestion, particularly because really what you're talking about is you're setting goals. You're actually establishing goals for yourself. Hard to do a personal review when you've had no goals as to what your performance expectations actually were. So I think that's probably a pretty good idea. The other thing that struck me though, as you were going through that list, was the challenges of a geographically large state. You know, I'm in Bradenton, Florida. I can drive 8 hours towards Pensacola, still not be out of the state. And I believe, Debbie, you're in Key West. It's another 8 hours the other direction. It makes it very challenging in Florida, and I'm sure Texas and other large Western states in particular have these challenges. Pennsylvania is a big state. Where are the documents kept? Are you using, you suggested Dropbox, technology for storage of documents. It's also, I'll make the pitch and argument for professional administration to some degree. And I don't mean it has to be a professional firm. Florida uses an extraordinarily capable woman who volunteered for us for quite some time, and we now employ her. And it has made a world of difference in terms of coordinating activities when we're just a bunch of goofy volunteers with full-time jobs. And so I know some states are very resistant to have an administrator. The psychology of the money, all the money going to the kids, but it is an investment that trust me, after going through the Florida golf tournament prior to having someone coordinating and going through after having someone coordinating, there's a world of difference and financially much more successful. So I think that's something an administrator, even a part-time person, could help coordinate some of those functions as a central repository for where those things may be kept.
It's interesting, Bob, you say that because we struggle with that same issue in Virginia, and we're just about to the point where I think we've worn them out to where we will do a paid administrator of some type. And I think it came out of early on where we had a board that was able to do a lot of pro bono type stuff, and the commitment in the beginning, and it became part of the culture, which was not a good thing long term for us,
right.
Which was this thing of we're gonna every dollar we raise we're gonna put to scholarships, and in reality, to hit our mission, which is more dollars, more kids.
Yeah.
What you quickly find out is that you need that type of support, and you still can be a very, very effective and frugal type board, but still have monies that go out for administrative help. And I think it helps you grow the organization, find more kids.
Yeah, I've always told people my justification is I would much rather give 90% of $100,000 than 100% of $10,000. I mean, and that's what that type of person can help you coordinate and just help keep people focused where they need to be, because we are all busy people with daytime jobs. And that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes down to meeting some of those other obligations.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
I agree. And Debbie, I just wanted to add, it's one of the things that when we asked our states at the national conference, those states that are high performing, We've noticed a double or triple in the amount of scholarship applications they've gotten and students that they've scholarshiped. We said, what's made the difference for you this year? And two things stood out. One, they got administrative help. So they really someone to those T's, dot those I's, really follow through, make sure everything was taken care of. And then several of the states shared the new Kaleidoscope platform that we really dedicated last year to, has made a big difference as well, because now through that Kaleidoscope link, they can share it far and wide. They're getting more applicants, they're getting more traction. So those two things made a big difference in of our states.
That's a good pitch for use of technology. Florida was an early state with Kaleidoscope, and what a difference from the shuffling of the first year. I manned the PO box. We were in Sarasota. Where are we going to have a mailing address? Well, there are 3 board members in Sarasota area. Okay, that's that's going to be home. And scanning and faxing and securing, because you got to password protect all those files because there's private information. Distributing those was a job, and so Kaleidoscope was. I was kind of removed from that function by the time Kaleidoscope really came online, but I can tell it was much easier using Kaleidoscope.
Thank you both for that. And efficiency is definitely a part of our next section, where we're going to talk a little bit about board performance. So we're going to circle back to this, what we just talked about here. So I've only got a couple of slides in this area. Next, please. I really want to look at the buckets, if you will, of board performance that we're going to talk about more. Governance, we've talked about. We need to talk about fiscal, our oversight of funds, ensuring our future. Fundraising, are we raising for today and tomorrow, or are we just meeting today's needs? Next slide. And then we want to look at communication. How do we share what national sends? Who's getting it? Who's sharing it? How do we share local happenings amongst each other? Brand and marketing, how are we consistently messaging to our stakeholders with the use of the logo, the imagery, the language? And then advocacy, how are we advocating for the kids and the families we serve? Next, please. So keep going, Julie. I'm going to just jump right into this checklist. So let's look at what collective performance might look at. We talked about governance with the bylaws, policies, record, document retention, the job description and evaluation, creating a culture of performance expectation, and also creating a culture where we can have productive conflict. A healthy debate of ideas stimulates growth. We don't want to have an all yes board. We want to bring new people and new ideas into our mix, and we want to have a culture where we can have really productive dialogue and debate around those ideas. We want to make sure we have clear roles and responsibilities and a good committee structure. Let's just not have committees to have committees. Let's have committees that we need to get the work product done. Next, please. We talked about documentation for all of your meetings. We also want to make sure that every one of our state organizations has a strategic plan. This can be really simple. A goal, 3 or 4 bullets of actions. It does not have to be fancy. I know that our boards are full of executives that do this at work all day long, and it's a very formal process. For most of our organizations, keeping it simple means it will be achieved. And so we're not looking for a biblical tome. We're really looking for a very good, focused strategic plan. Where do we want to be in the next 3 years? What do we have to do to make that happen? We want to make sure that every organization has an annual budget. You might say, well, we raise money and we give it out in scholarships. Okay, great. But as you grow, you want to show your sources of how you're raising that money. Is it corporate? Is it individual? Is it multi-year pledges? Single-year pledges? Are you lucky enough to have an endowment with investment income? You want to show your budget of your income, and then you want to show your expenses. And as you grow and you are paying for outside services, that will be important to show in your budget as well. at least quarterly, you want to have a review of your financials. And a really important piece of this is if you are an all volunteer board and you do not have professional bookkeeping assistance or outside CPA assistance, separation of duties is essential to have, so that the volunteer getting the bill is different than the volunteer paying the bill, is different than the volunteer double checking the bank account and reconciling the bank statements. That separation of financial duties avoids fiscal misconduct, and fiscal misconduct is the single biggest way we could ever lose donor trust. And we are only as strong as every state. So if we ever got in a situation where one of our states had fiscal misconduct, that would hurt our whole network of 50 states and national if we lost trust that way. So we want to be especially careful with our separation of financial responsibilities. Fundraising.
Hey, Debbie,
Yeah.
can I ask one question that maybe is important for states to know and understand? What's the requirement for audits based on your size?
Typically it's $1 million or above. You would want to have an audit, but many organizations smaller than that choose to have an audit because of the credibility it brings to the organization.
And is there a suggestion as to, most of our organizations are under $1 million? Is there a suggestion that it might be a good practice to do that every 2 years, or is that the practice?
Well, that's a really good conversation. So there is a step that you can take as a small organization called a financial review. And in a financial review, it essentially does many of the same components. It's done by an outside audit firm. It performs the same check and balance of what are your policies and are your practice in alignment with your policies. And it does give a good housekeeping stamp to smaller organizations that aren't yet large enough to warrant having an audit. But an outside review every 2 to 3 years is a very healthy practice and a good housekeeping seal of approval that you can say to your donors, we're mature enough as an organization to know we need this, and we want to show you that other people are having oversight of our finances. That's a really super good question, John. Thank you. So we don't have to bring the deck back up, but I do want to talk about that last bullet on that slide, the fundraising now and for the future. Many of you are aware we have a planning for the future committee, which student pipeline, if you will, where anyone in the country can go and put their child or children into our database, and we track them. And when they become 16, we do a warm handoff to the state for a scholarship. Quarterly, we send to your scholarship chair a report of what is in your pipeline. We aren't sure that the scholarship shares are getting and sharing that information with the board. When we looked recently, about 70% of the 1,100 kids in the pipeline are turning 16 in the next 3 years. That is a lot of kids that is going to be hitting states. We will be doing an update report to all of the states this year, showing you the demographics of what is in your state pipeline at the moment, so you know when folks are turning 16. Your scholarship chair has been getting information all along, but I'm going back to say, how is communications at your board? When you have board meetings, are you saying, hey, who's gotten a notification from national that the rest of us need to know about, right? The presidents get notifications. Other board members get notifications, the scholarship chairs. How are you sharing that information in a routine way? And how are you getting written reports from your committees that then creates records for the people who walk behind you? The hardest thing walking into a new job as a board member Or think about in your everyday life, right? When you walk into a job, there's no records there. There's no history there. There's no understanding of the why did we do it that way? There must have been a reason, right? So I'm going to pause there and turn it to our panelists to talk about your expertise in the board performance area.
Well, I'm not sure I would refer to my own knowledge as expertise. So let's not set the bar too terribly high here. Obviously, you know, I think quarterly financial reports, reviewing the financials for the board quarterly are critical, and people need to do that. I don't argue with any of the points you made. The hardest part is when you're dealing with the treasurer position, it's one of the toughest positions to fill on any board. Treasurer and secretary are the jobs people generally don't want. And so again, my own experience, very fortunate. We had one person in treasurer for several years. She's currently the president now, Kids Chance of Florida, and did an outstanding job in terms of the detail and the level of report and tracking of the donations, things like that. It was very good. I would say from a communication perspective, particularly where it relates with national, and I will point to myself, when I was president, there was information that would come down that I would probably sometimes forget to mention to the board. I would forget to say it. I know there are other communications that go out that never make it to people beyond the people who heard it. I really recommend national expand that database of individual contacts for state purposes, like 2 or 3 or 4 people, so that you have a better chance of getting those words out. Because, you know, having gone now, we just went through a Kids Chance convention and a lot of good information. Some of that will get conveyed to a full board. A lot of it won't, simply because there was so much. So how can we improve that line of communication? Very challenging in an all-volunteer organization to have that line of communication open. And maybe there are, again, technology tools that can be used, whether it's a discussion center, discussion forum, a tracking that can track conversations, that maybe we need to look at in order to better improve that communication in the boards at the state level.
All great points, Bob. One thing I want to stress that I think it's important for states to do, and we saw this one or two times where states. So 2 things. One is modeling your present scholarships for future needs and monies and all the rest. Really good practice. And what do I mean by that? In year 1, you turn around, you raise X amount of dollars, and you find X number of kids, and you make a decision as to what your scholarship amount is going to be. It's going to be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year. Modeling that out for your present students and knowing and understanding that you're probably making a 4-year commitment to most of these kids, unless they're on community college or some type of trade school. Really important to have an Excel spreadsheet, a model around what you've committed to in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, so that when you get to year 2 and you've got 6 kids from year 1 that are on there for the next 3 years, and you get another 6 kids on top of that, that you're always looking forward and being able to model out, what are my future needs going to be? And am I raising funds at sufficient level to cover those needs for the future? And we've had a couple of instances in the past where states basically came in and said, we raised $50,000 this year. We're going to give out $50,000 in scholarships. And I remember one in particular where they got to year 2 or year 3, they didn't raise the monies for whatever reason, and they ran into a real problem. And nationally, we got involved in that situation. We worked that out with that state. I think in that case, we lent them some money to make sure they could meet their commitments. But modeling out what you need in the future, and this planning for the future with this data that we're going to be providing to all the states will go a long way to telling you what's in the pipeline that we don't even know. We're out there trying to find kids on our own, and we've got this pipeline that's already back here for next year, the following year, 10 years from now. Really keeping an eye on that, I think, is really important. The other piece is making sure you set a scholarship amount that is meaningful to the kids. I think most states have policies in place that define sort of they want to be meaningful around these things. We did have some states that went out and took some big jumps with their scholarships. And the only question I had was, if you were a big state, Texas or Florida, and you're giving $10,000 scholarships, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, will you be able to do that when the scale is not 20 kids, but it's 100 kids?
Yeah.
That you have on? Being able to project those things really important.
Yeah, those are really good points, because I mean, a lot of people may be able to resonate with this statement. You may notice these kids don't wash out. Statistically, when they're in, they go. They're going to finish the program. So I think the plan, and Florida has really taken that approach in terms of knowing if they've given a scholarship this year, they can plan on another 3 years of supporting that student, if not more. I think there are other ways too to also look at creative ways to finance some of them, and not every state has this option. Again, I go back to my experience in Florida. We have a prepaid college foundation program that's outstanding. We can actually buy, and we do this every year. The scholarship committee, as part of our approval, going through scholarships and approving them, also commit funds to purchase a single year or several single years out of a prepaid tuition for someone for the entire year in a state school. We don't have to assign a name to it until it's cashed in. And ultimately, if we didn't use it, we could get the money back. No interest, but we get the money back. It's a very low risk, no risk investment, but it's a way to ensure. And so some of the scholarships we award every year are a prepaid fund scholarship. Your tuition is paid for the year. And if other states have those programs where you can do that without having to assign an individual, definitely recommend looking into something like that.
Great point.
Great suggestion. We had a couple of questions I want to toss out. One of them was, we look at each event and the net proceeds. Is the purpose to raise funds or get the message out? And are we maximizing our net fundraising goal? So I don't know about you guys. I would say the purpose is always to do both, right?
I'd say both. Yeah. I'd say both. You're even a fundraiser is a branding opportunity to establish awareness, and I mean, very beneficial. I think, and they have longer term effects. Our golf tournament, we had Olivia, one of our national ambassadors, at one point speak, and someone was so impressed with what she said, he made a $10,000 donation to Kids Chance of Florida 3 days later, and he has made a private $10,000 donation every year since, based on that. That was a fundraising event, but we were branding and getting the name out of who we were. I think those go hand in hand in my mind.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree totally. It's interesting. These things parallel what we're trying to do at a national level as well, which is broaden the community and broaden those that we invite into our communities. So using events, for example, to get beyond sort of the workers' comp industry, really good opportunity from a branding standpoint to broaden the world around us.
Yep.
The next one is actually a suggestion for PFF. Leah suggests that she's hearing that reaching out to students at junior high, middle school age is better than waiting until they're 16 to plant the expectation that post-high school education is a possibility. So
actually, this is one I'm dealing with right now. So in Northern Virginia, I'm in the process of holding meetings with school resource officers for the school systems. And I started my initial contact with a resource officer at an elementary school. So this is grade 1, kindergarten sort of level, and introduced all the way up the line. This is a great opportunity for exactly that point. Planning for the future, we want those families, when those losses occurred, they have children that are age 2, they're age 4, they're age 10, and they're age 16. They're all at different points. We want the families thinking about education of their children, and not thinking about, do I have to put this child, take them out of school so they can work to help support the family when they're 14 or 15 years old. I think the earlier you can get to that is better. And so my mission in Virginia is to get to every school in Virginia, get to the lowest level possible, and get a network going when the children are young, because those resource officers know a lot about the family situation. And so if they recognize that that situation is created by a disabled worker, for example, in the family, getting that information to us for planning for the future at an early stage, starting the conversation with that parent is a really important step. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, and perhaps even planning for the future could have a preliminary contact recommendation going out to states at the age of 12 or 13, where that original contact can be made, and national as a support operation may even be able to help with a mailer. I mean, I don't know what contact these kids get if they're 2 years old when they're in the system. Do they hear from us until age 16?
So
I can't answer that. I don't know.
I
But-
can answer that. The parents hear from us regularly.
Okay, good.
Or the guardian, whoever enrolls the child as the legal guardian, they hear from us at least several times a year to
Okay.
check in, to make sure, if you registered in Texas, are you still in Texas? Have you moved?
Right.
And to
right.
try to stay in contact with them. And so we are in contact with them. But we're not really focused on having conversations about the importance of education. We're assuming, since they enrolled their children for scholarship, that they're already a believer of that.
Yeah. But
the
even at
question is,
that point,
who
if you're doing that function, that's great. An early contact recommendation list could go out to the states, and they may want to be able to establish at a more local level that relationship at that point.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We could totally start moving that dial below 16 easily.
Debbie, I wanted to address the question that the person who asked, do we have sample self-review forms? And we do. We'll share those. We'll share those after this presentation. We'll send you the PowerPoint as well as the recording and any handouts that that came up throughout the question or throughout the webinar. Debbie, with your permission, I did want to just pose one question to both panelists, and I know we are very close to the end of time. That went quick. That hour went really, really quickly. Bob and John, what does accountability look like from a state board level? Like we understand from a national level, you guys are in that national, headspace right now. But when you think back to your days on the state level board, what did accountability look like on that state level?
Well, at our level, and we were a very new board. I mean, we were founding board members. We had set up certain committees, whether it was fundraising, whether it was outreach, where we attempted to follow up and hold accountable as to what activities were happening on those committees. I would say that structure was fairly informal in that respect. There weren't any, although we would set certain goals that we would certainly try and achieve, particularly in the fundraising realm, and to see what we were doing. But it was really in communication in our quarterly board meetings that where those follow-ups, every committee had an opportunity to talk about what they were doing or what they didn't get done. One or two meetings when I was fundraising chair, what might not have been done that should have been done, those type of things. But I think you have to have that opportunity every year. Should be holding quarterly board meetings. If you're not now, you should be. And at that point, every committee has that opportunity. In fact, the requirement to report on the activities for that time. I think I would say that was it. And I would describe it really as an informal process because we did not have the governance committee and those other things. But that's really what we did.
So more peer-to-peer. What I'm hearing is it's more peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
In my experience, same as Bob's. And I think if I look back like 12 years and I say, well, what are the lessons coming out of that? And I would call us a fairly successful state relative to most. But I think turning informal to formal, the sooner you do that, I think the better off you are in terms of being able to have those conversations. And as I said, the practice that I like is some type of a yearly pledge statement from each board member in terms of what they're committing to do, it makes it so much easier to have the conversations. And because it's a volunteer board, it's more difficult to have those conversations with volunteers.
Yeah.
And I find that if you have a more formalized structure, it's much easier. Plus, my experience on the national is many board members, because they get taken up so much with life and family and all the things that go on around them, it's much easier for a board member who's not performing well and not adding to what you expect. It's much easier for them to self-select. And we see a lot of that. So I think you create that opportunity by formalizing your process.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, Debbie, I'm going to give you a chance to finish your slides. I think you have a couple more, but I wanted to say to all of our webinar attendees, if you had any questions, just please type them in chat. I will capture those and we can answer those offline. I know we are getting to the end of our seminar, but or webinar. So I did want to let Debbie finish. I think you just had a couple more slides. Maybe, let's see here. Yes.
Thank you, Cheryl. So we've kind of covered these checklists, making sure that we want to do these things. So this is my what to avoid slide, and it's recycling board members. I do think there's always an exception where there's someone tremendously passionate who is a really hard worker that is probably worth recycling. But if you start to look at your board and more than 2 or 3 people are being recycled, that's an unhealthy sign, actually. And you can take this down and we can have a quick conversation. Yeah. We want to honor those that work hard and love us and want to come back, but we also want to make space for new people and new energy and new ideas and new growth. And sometimes when people come back to us and we get too many people who come back at the same time, we spend too much time retreading what got us here. And a healthy board is always looking at what's going to get us there, right? What got us here may not be the same thing we need to get us there. And so I just throw up a caution flag that if we get into recycling too much, we probably need to step back and say, are we just hitting the easy button with this? And what should we really be doing for board cultivation? And I'm going to turn it to Bob and John.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think I'm a living example of a successful board's policy. Our founding board, we established term limits on our board that we have to roll out. I am one of the first ones who rolled out. I'm now an emeritus because I was a founding board member, which means I can still show up and give my opinion, and I have lots of opinions, but I can't vote on anything. It's really important, one, to bring in fresh blood, fresh thinking, fresh views. One of the things we did that I think that was very successful is we established years ago an ambassador program for people who are interested in supporting and volunteering. And one of those ambassadors today is the vice president of the Kids Chance of Florida. She's rolled onto the board and she's doing a great job. The other thing I'm going to throw out, you really didn't touch on it, was if you look around your board and you're an attorney and you're surrounded by 8 other attorneys, or you're an insurance professional and you're surrounded by 8 other insurance professionals, you do not have the most effective board you could have. When we set up Florida, we wanted a wide variety and we wanted a representation from all the stakeholders in the industry. We have a defense attorney, we have a plaintiff's attorney, we have insurance, we have medical, we have employers, we have vendors, we have, and I will tell you, for whatever reason, even though we didn't have some of that structure of the governance committee and such, that board has worked and it continues to be a very strong board today, based on the fact that we have not set it up to become stagnant. We will keep things fresh. I'm not saying they're great because they got rid of me, but don't infer that. It is really important to have a board that can represent a wide variety of viewpoints and experiences within our industry, and that we're not there forever. If you're there forever, you get stale.
I can't add anything. Bob said it perfectly. Those are great practices and healthy boards, very diverse, always changing, always looking at succession. And what we try to do nationally is try to find space for board members who are coming off board assignments if they still have a passion for Kids Chance, we have to get creative and find ways to embed them in other places that are not board assignments where they can still make contributions to Kids Chance.
Yep.
So we had a really good question I want you guys to discuss quickly, and your thoughts on maximum optimal number of board members and best practices around length of terms for term limits.
Bob, you want me to go first on this, or
If
you
you'd
wanna
like to, sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
that'd be great.
I'll take a stab. So the term limit thing, I'm of the opinion, could be wrong, could be right, that members shouldn't serve by more than probably, I don't know, I'll throw out 5-6 years in assignments. Maybe that's 2 or 3, two assignments, but not beyond that.
Yeah.
I don't think is a great practice. And what was the first question you asked, Debbie?
Number, your thoughts
Oh,
on
number-
is there
number.
a maximum number?
I think personally, especially at a state level, optimal number 12, 13. I wouldn't get into 15, 16, 18. I think what happens is those meetings are very, very difficult when you have that many people at the table.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we were 3 2-year terms, what we were capped at. I would agree with that time frame. In terms of number of people, you want enough people to be able to do the work, so you need more than 6 or 7 people. But anything you go beyond 12, and you need an odd number. You never want an even number. You want an odd number. I would say, 11 or 13 people were probably max. The old Amazon, I don't know if you've ever heard the Amazon theory on committee meetings. Never have a committee that can't be fed with more than 2 pizzas or something like that. I think it's 2 pizzas. Which was a real challenge because it would be a committee of me and whoever else could eat the other pizza. So, it'd be a small committee if I'm involved in it. But no, I think that is probably the number ideally that you'd probably want to look for.
Mm-hmm. And I would say what Board Source and Board Effect and some of the other learn centers for best practices are saying is 6, whether it's 2 3-year consecutive terms or 3 2-year consecutive terms, that after 6 years, people should have to rotate off for a minimum of a year, better 2 years, before you would even consider recycling them back on your board. And I agree with you guys. Everybody's max number is going to be based on the work product they need to generate, because you don't want one person to have to serve on 4 committees and to try to do everything. You do want to spread the work out.
Agreed. Debbie, are there any other slides that you'd like to share? Or are we good? Did we get through them?
We are all great.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you, Debbie, and John and Bob. This was very enlightening. I hope our attendees really took something away from this. As I shared, we will share the PowerPoint, the recording, as well as any handouts based on our conversation. Always a good time when we can get people together and really have robust conversation around board. Thank you so much. I think I did just see one more question pop in. Oh, Carolyn just said thanks. You're welcome, Carolyn. So this concludes. And I will say that this is the end of our formal programming for this fiscal year around educational programs. We know moving into June, people go on vacation, July. Debbie and I are going to spend the next 2 months really reorganizing and planning for the next fiscal year. So thank you, Debbie, for leading us in our last formal educational program. We appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sharon and Julie.
Bye-bye.